Are you feeling the financial heat lately? Well, you're not alone. The world economy seems to be on the verge of a meltdown, and we've been here before. The pages of history have been scarred by several economic turndowns that have left a lasting impact on our lives. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at the top 5 recessions of all time in U.S. history that have rocked our financial world. Ready? Let's dive in. Number 5, the Energy Crisis Recession, January through July 1980. The historic recession was triggered by the overthrow of the Shah of Iran, which led to an Islamic theocracy taking power. The sudden turn of events caused a 4% reduction in U.S. oil production, leading to supply disruptions and localized shortages. As a result, the cost of oil doubled, leaving the entire country in shock. With the skyrocketing oil prices came a rapid increase in inflation, which rose to a staggering 14.6%. The rising cost of oil was felt in every aspect of the economy and led to a deep recession. Real GDP fell by a whopping 8% in the second quarter in 1980, and unemployment rose to 7.8%. This was a difficult time for many Americans, and the government was forced to take action to stabilize the economy. The Fed's monetary contributed to the fall of the GDP. In an effort to control inflation, the Fed raised interest rates sharply beginning in March 1977. By January 1980, the Fed's flooded rate stood at over 13%, leaving many businesses struggling to stay afloat. President Jimmy Carter's efforts to restrict credit creation helped to reduce both inflation and interest rates, but it was too little too late. The economy was already struggling with high inflation rates in the 1970s, and the oil crisis hit things even harder. The Energy Crisis Recession lasted for 6 quarters and saw a peak unemployment rate of 10.8%. It was a challenging period that impacted many lives, and it took years for the economy to fully recover from this crisis. Number 4, the Oil Crisis Recession, November 1973 to March 1975. This recession was no ordinary one. It was long, deep, and painful, lasting almost 2 years and leaving the economy battered and bruised. In the first quarter of 1974, real GDP shrank by a whopping 3.4%. The economy rebounded briefly, only to fall again by 3.7% in the third quarter and 4.8% in the first quarter of 1975. To make matters worse, unemployment hit 9% in May 1975. But what made this recession stand out was the high inflation rate, which was 11% at the start of the recession and still over 9% when the recession ended. This, combined with poor economic growth, rising employment, and stubbornly high inflation, birthed a unique economic lingua that now is popularly known as stagflation. Well, it all started in 1971 when President Richard M. Nixon suspended the dollar's gold convertibility, which ended the system of fixed exchange rates that have been in place since World War II. Without its gold anchor, the U.S. dollar's exchange rate fell rapidly, causing inflation to shoot up. Around the same time, the Texan oil fields hit their peak production, which forced the U.S. to cede control of oil prices to OPEC. In 1973, OPEC imposed an oil embargo to the U.S. due to the financial support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War. As a result, the price of oil skyrocketed from $4.31 to $10.11 a barrel by January 1974. Although the embargo was lifted in March 1974, the price of oil continued to rise and peaked at an astonishing $39.50 from April through July of 1980. This sharp increase in oil prices caused household and businesses' costs to soar. As a result, businesses passed on these costs to consumers in the form of higher prices, while households demanded higher wages to compensate for their increased living expenses. This created a vicious wage war spiral that kept inflation high despite rising unemployment and falling economic growth. Number 3, the Great Recession of 2008, December 2007 to June 2009. This had the longest and deepest recession since World War II. It all started in 2007 when the housing market was hit particularly hard. House prices fell a whopping 30% from their peak in mid-2006 to their lowest point in mid-2009. And it wasn't just the housing market that was affected. The stock market suffered a catastrophic collapse as well, with the S&P 500 index falling 57% between October 2007 and mid-2009. The recession was primarily triggered by the collapse of the subprime residential mortgage-backed securities (RMBS) market, which had grown enormously in the years since 2001 recession. Everything went downhill from here. The RMBS collapse caused disruptions in financial markets, which ultimately brought banks and led to numerous U.S. monoline insurance companies failing. Disruptions in credit and capital markets continued for the rest of 2007 and into 2008, though the stock market soared, reaching an all-time high in October 2007. Early in 2008, the U.S. Federal Reserve cut interest rates and President George W. Bush signed into law the Economic Stimulus Act. But economic growth was already slowing. A string of bailouts and buyouts followed, all of which created an expectation that financial institutions that got into difficulty would not be allowed to fail. But when Lehman Brothers, the fourth largest U.S. investment bank, declared a Chapter 11 bankruptcy on September 16, 2008, shockwaves rippled around the world. The money market mutual fund Reserve Primary immediately fell below $1 per share and triggered runs on other money market funds, wiping out the savings of millions of Americans. The government responded by implementing exceptional stimulus measures, and the Federal Reserve made unprecedented interest rate cuts. But despite these efforts, the economy continued to decline. Real GDP began falling in the third quarter of 2008, plummeted 8.5% in the fourth quarter, and continued to drop until mid-2009. It was a rough period for the economy, and it took 2 whole years to recover its lost GDP. The impact of the financial crisis was profound and continues to influence economic policy today. Number 2, the Great Depression, 1929 to 1938. The Great Depression was a monster of a recession caused by a deadly cocktail of events. Firstly, the stock market crashed in 1929, set the nation into a frenzy with businesses going belly up and everyday people losing their hard-earned savings. Secondly, the banks failed on a massive scale, causing widespread panic and a breakdown of trust in financial institutions. This led to a massive reduction in investment, which in turn resulted in a staggering 26.7% decline in GDP. Unemployment rates skyrocketed during this time, with the rate peaking at a mind-boggling 24.9%. It was actually 2 related recessions, the first running from August 1929 to March 1933. During this time, the economy contracted by record-breaking 12.9% in 1932. The 1929 stock market crash was another nail in the coffin, causing widespread panic and devastating many businesses. A 10-year drought in the Midwest created the Dust Bowl, which was another blow to the economy as it caused widespread crop failures, agriculture output to plummet. The Great Depression of the 1930s was a challenging time in American history, but it also taught us valuable lessons about the importance of government intervention and the dangers of unregulated markets. Number 1, COVID-19 recession, February through April 2020. This is a story that many of us lived through, and it impacted our lives in numerous ways. The recession of 2020 was one of the shortest and deepest in modern history, and its effects are still felt today. The recession was caused by the outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 virus, which quickly spread worldwide. It was a time of great uncertainty, fear, and confusion as we tried to understand and contain the virus. Businesses were forced to shut down and people were ordered to stay home. Life as we knew it came to a screeching halt. The impact of the lockdown measures was not uniform, however. Some households were able to work from home while others suffered from sharply failing income due to unemployment. As businesses closed their doors, workers were left without a paycheck and forced to make difficult decisions. The pandemic's effects were felt most acutely in sectors like hospitality, tourism, and retail, which saw a sharp decline in demand. However, online retailers, delivery services, and healthcare providers experienced a boom as people were forced to stay home. The recession lasted only 2 months. From peak to trough, real GDP fell 31.2% in the second quarter of 2020, and unemployment peaked at 14.7% in April 2020. In summary, the COVID-19 recession was a tough time for everyone. It highlighted how much we take for granted and how quickly things can change. And while we still might be in the first quarter of the year, recessionary pressures remain active within the US economy, and this recession might just be the Godzilla of any economic turndown ever witnessed in America. According to experts, it's predicted to be one of the worst we've seen in the last 40 years. The US and global economy appear to be bracing for a big blow, but unfortunately, even the most optimistic forecasts suggest that this recession will be pretty severe. So you might want to start bracing yourself too. For investors, it's like a case of deja vu because we're still recovering from the great crash of 2022. Just when we thought we could breathe a sigh of relief, the impending recession is like a dark cloud looming over our portfolios. It's like a horror movie where the bad guy just won't die. So what can you do about it? Well, you need to be proactive, think positively, and stay informed about what's going on. You also need to find new ways to make money, save money, and above all, invest smartly. So buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.